DNS, and we're going to talk about monitoring, detecting DNS evidence of security breaches, and then I'll talk about a couple of projects. That's the plan. And so we're going to talk, if you monitor data to see what's going on in a network, which is extremely important. And by the way, before I go any further, I should mention, I'm writing this project for one of my corporate consulting. They wanted to learn SOAR. So I've begun to publish the projects. So if you want to, you can do them. It would help me. Splunk SOAR projects where they capture the flag, where you install Splunk and you install Splunk SOAR. It doesn't do anything yet, but it took me several days just to get it installed right. It's not easy to install. But Splunk itself is the intrusion detection system. All right, let's see if I can get this stupid thing to work. That's the problem with Opera. They've changed the right click, so it's hard to operate. Really? Oh, okay, well, never mind. They're not up yet. I forgot to upload them. I'll talk about it later. All right, so anyway, the data you have to monitor what's going on in your network, which is what you do with Splunk, SIEM system, you get log data from your various systems, your firewalls, your web servers, everything has logs. Then you can have network flow data, which summarizes who's been talking to who. And then you can have packet data, recorded packets. You have the complete network traffic, and then you might have other metadata from an application that stores information specific to that application. Those are the types of data you might have to monitor what's happening on a network. Now, logs are automatically generated as programs run, and Microsoft Windows writes all kinds of logging into Windows, and every operating system does, and every application does. And so it will log some things. Now for DNS servers, it will often log defective queries it can't process, and errors. Typically the only thing it logs is errors, because if you log everything, that bogs down the server. So you log errors, delegations that fail, where it says, go ask this other server, but that server isn't there, queries for non-existent domains. These are the sort of things that are typically logged by default. You can configure binds logging. In the named.configuration file, you can specify what category of things to log. So you can define the output medium, which can be syslog, or you can send it to files. Syslog is the standard Unix logging engine that gathers all the logs in one place and can easily be forwarded to a remote log acquiring system. It's the really old system. There's various versions. You can make it so it logs to files, and it automatically rolls the file to another file every periodically, which is a pretty common thing to do, so that you don't get one huge file. And also so you can have only a limited amount of size, and it throws away the old ones to make room for the new ones. By the way, I just heard a Microsoft report. Microsoft had an Outlook 365 intrusion, and they found out how it happened. In 2021, a machine crashed, and the crash dump contained the private key of a identifying certificate, which was not supposed to happen, and that crash dump was moved to a machine on the web, and it was stolen by hackers. And they say they're pretty sure this is what happened, but they're not sure because, due to log retention policies, they no longer have logs from 2 years ago, which is very common. You don't normally keep logs forever. Anyway, then you got severity, critical events, info is everything, and you can choose what is printed in the log. And so you might log queries. This will log the client IP address and the port number, their question, and then you can get information. So there's a recording. Here's someone trying to find example.com. All right, now let's see. Do we have a cyber? Okay, IDS. Yep. IDS is another way to do this. All right, so then there's security. These are, the security category is things of security importance. Requests that were denied, things that were rejected by access control lists, and you set them using allow clear, allow recursion, allow transfer. And we mentioned before, for example, a zone transfer should not be allowed to just anybody. There should be a list of IP addresses allowed to do a zone transfer and other people not allowed, because that's not something you want the whole world to do. And you can have other limitations. And in general, every product, including DNS servers, will record security relevant events. Where somebody tries to do something forbidden, you want to know when that happens, because that often indicates somebody is attacking you. All right, then there's update security. These are requests to update the zone data. And so if those are denied, that's another security important event. That means somebody's trying to push data onto your server, and for some reason they're not allowed to. All right. And then DNSSEC, which we mentioned quite a bit here. DNSSEC gives you these cryptographic signatures on the DNS records, and you can log the performance of your DNSSEC if you do enable it. So here's DNSSEC example, validating nist.gov, attempting a positive response validation, checking the DNS key, going through it all, and then deciding various steps, signed by trusted key, marking as secure, complicated cryptographic steps as it verifies this thing. Just like when you make an HTTPS connection, there's a complicated 7-step process to get the certificate, verify it at a third party, make sure everything is okay. All right, then there's transfer in and out. You can log these. There is a transfer out to a certain client, so you know who's making zone transfers, because that's important. If that's not your servers, then something is wrong. All right, so that's all log data. Then there's packet data. You could record every packet on the network. Now, by the way, I remember when I first heard about this like 20 years ago, I immediately rebelled and said, that's not possible. If I have a hub or a switch with 16 ports, and all those ports are screaming at the maximum speed, there's no way any port can be fast enough to get all the data. And in fact, that is true. You can have a span port on a switch. If you have, say, gigabit switch with 16 ports, and you turn one of them into a span port, it will send a copy of every packet out that port, but obviously only if the total amount of packets is less than 1 gig. So in fact, this is a big issue. Monitoring high traffic networks is not easy at all. And you do it by buying a special device just for this purpose. An optical splitter. In the old days, you'd use a hub, but these days you get a special splitter just to get a copy of every packet. The span port might not be fast enough. Special hardware, and actually not cheap, built for this, goes in line, makes an extra copy of every packet, and sends it to a recording device. All right. Then there's network flow data. And flow data is something simpler and easier to handle than packet data. The problem with packet data is two huge problems. One is it's really big. You can easily have 500 megabytes a day or much more of data. So it's a huge amount of data to store. And then it's a huge amount of data to look through. And most of it is boring and useless, especially now that everything is encrypted. That whole packet is probably unreadable anyway. So it's not that common that you really record whole packet data. And if you do, you don't keep it for long because it's big. It's of questionable value. Whole packet data is like an entire hard drive image from a computer. It's way too much data. Whatever you're doing, you probably don't want to wade through all that, only in cases where it really matters. What you'd much rather have is a small amount of data that tells you what you need without gigabytes of unnecessary junk in it. And that's flow data is a summary of this. The point of flow data, this is Cisco product called NetFlow, and the point of this was the same as telephone conversations. This is the same thing as the pen register for telephones. For decades, telephones have had a pen register which records what phone number called what other phone number, what time, and how long it was, and the purpose was to make your phone bill, to bill you by the minute. And NetFlow is the same. Your ISP can bill you by the amount of bandwidth you use and limit it, and so that's all flow data is. So it just tells you source and destination IP, port and protocol, and something like the total number of bytes transmitted, something like that. So you get one line of data telling you this, and Cisco developed this standard, and it became the standard for this kind of data. So if you have a TCP session, TCP sessions have a clear beginning and end. They have a handshake to start them, then they have a flow, and it ends with a fin or reset, so you clearly know how much traffic belongs in one flow. So you'll get one line of data for a whole TCP session. With UDP, there is no sequence number, and there is no handshake, and there is no fin. So you have to kind of guess when the flow ends. When it finds that it's stopped having activity for a certain period of time, then it calls it the end of that flow. So your UDP flow data might be harder to interpret. So your flow records will look like this. You'll have the router name, source IP, destination IP, number of packets transferred, number of bytes transferred, then the start time and end time in UTC, which is the number of seconds since January 1, 1970 or something like that. Then a couple of source and destination ports, and at the end a protocol number and TCP flags. So that record is one record for a whole TCP flow sending 8,000 bytes of data, and that's what you get. So you cannot reconstruct the data that was sent, but you do know who's talking to who when. All right. And therefore, if you are doing an incident response investigation and you find an infected machine sending traffic to a command and control server, you can get that command and control server's IP address and then search for other people that are talking to that IP address, and that probably indicates that they're infected. And this is the kind of thing you use Splunk for a lot. Anyway, then there's application level metadata. The flow records, as you can see, give very little information. Your application can store more data as it runs. And the packet data is overwhelming. And so application layer metadata is another way to do it. And here your server will record what it wants to. So here it might store the domain, the address, the time, and the number of responses. So this shows example.com, and somebody's asked 15,000 times for example.com. So that's obviously some kind of attack. And so, a specialized data gathered by a server is often the most helpful, but each of these has their own value. So let's try a Kahoot. And check here, is span port the same as mirroring the traffic? Yes. Yeah, they also call it a mirror port. It's the same thing. All right, and Kahoot. Well, there's actually heat in this room for the first time in a year. I used to have to bring a whole bag of winter clothes to teach in here in the winter. They finally fixed the heater. Actually installed the new heater in the room. But anyway, is this chapter 4? I think it is. Yeah, all right, good. So if people want to come physically, it is more possible than it was in the last couple semesters. You do not need to bring a whole bag of winter clothes to come, which is what's been necessary in the past. All right, so what kind of data uses IPFix? All right, that's Cisco's NetFlow standard, which is now the standard, NetFlow. All right. All right, what kind of data is controlled by named.conf? Named is the name daemon for bind, and so your logs are configured there. What data to log by bind. And what kind of data is captured at a span port? A network tap. That's what the word I couldn't remember. Tap is the device to capture all the data, to make a second copy of all the packets. That's what it is. Anyway, those are packets. You copy all the packets to the span port. All right, and what log entry shows that someone collected your bind data with a zone transfer? X for out, as you would imagine. DNSSEC has got nothing to do with zone transfers. All right, so what kind of data protects the privacy of your users by excluding IP addresses? I think, yeah, the metadata in this case didn't. I guess that's interesting. And this, by the way, is what happened to Microsoft. They had systems to avoid putting private keys in the crash dumps, but they failed. There's a similar issue. All right. Good. So let's go back to here. Okay. So if you want to detect attacks, the one we talked about a lot is the Kaminsky cache poisoning attack, where you send a request, your server sends a request to some other server to get data, and you put in a fake answer, trying to put in a fake answer before the real answer comes in by guessing the transaction ID and source port. So you make a request, the attacker makes a request for a record that is not cached. That forces the server to ask for a record, and then they blast the server with a lot of spoofed responses, hoping to get lucky and guess the source port and transaction ID. So if you keep the flows that come from DNS or go to DNS, then you can see it coming in. And so here you'll have one packet going out from here to here, and then many responses coming from someone else into your server. So you send your server, well, I guess I'm a little confused. I expected to see, I see that the attacker sent a request to the server. Then the server sends a request somewhere else, which for some reason is not shown here. And then the attacker sends a whole bunch of fake records trying to get in all the, I don't quite understand this. This coming from a third party and missing. I don't quite understand how this sequence of flow records, it seems incomplete to me. You should see a request from the attacker, then the server making a request to some other server, and then a flood of fake answers from the attacker. Now, anyway, this part I understand. This part seems incomplete to me. Anyway, all right, so your flow records have no layer 7 data. They don't have the DNS request. So you can't find the domains being targeted or the addresses being injected. So that's a limitation of flow data. You have some information, but you don't really have the complete information about what's going on there. All right, so DNS requests are irrelevant to this. Poisoning is formed by replies. So if you wanted to reconfigure your logging or your IDS to get the necessary data, you need the source and destination IP, the domain name, these sections here, which we talked about last time, which are used to amplify the attack, transaction ID, timestamp, and you only want to care about authoritative replies. Authoritative replies are what would be used to poison the cache. All right, now there's other kinds of funny DNS problems. Transient domains change over hours or days, and the IP addresses are not owned by the same autonomous system, which is an ISP typically. So this is something that jumps across different carriers, and that is not normal, and that's typically something like a malicious site, or what they're doing is using hacked servers to serve up malware or to be command control centers. It could be something else, like security research, but it's suspicious behavior. So you collect DNS traffic with small TTLs. This is another really common trick. The TTL is how long it will cache the record before it replaces it, and typically you set it to like hours or days to lessen load on your authoritative server, but criminals set it small, like 1 minute, so it can change very often. So you record useful records would be the domain that was queried, the answer, and the timestamp. And here's one of the cases where you might exclude the IP address for privacy. All right. Then there's round-robin DNS, which is a legitimate technique used by a lot of companies, and this one I can demonstrate live. I tried it earlier. If you do a dig, let's get a terminal. All right, if I do a dig for the A record of yahoo.com, whoops, got to spell Yahoo better. All right, I get a whole bunch of IP addresses for yahoo.com. This is one way to perform load balancing. Now, Microsoft used to do this, by the way, and they don't seem to do it anymore. Now oh, that's interesting. It didn't work. What's that?
How can they specify many records for one?
Well, you can have many records, and that means there are many IP addresses that have a copy of the page, and you can use any of them. This is one way to do it. Now, when I tried it at home, I was only getting one IP address from Microsoft, so I think it depends on what network you're on. But I mean, you can have one IP address, which still stands for many servers, or you can have multiple IP addresses. On campus, it looks like our original plan to do Microsoft would work. But anyway, let me stick with Yahoo because I know that works. If I do Yahoo, I get all this information. Now, I would like to just have just this part of it and nothing else. So the way to do that in Dig, you have these funny flags, which is plus no all to get rid of everything, and then plus answer. Now it will show me just the answer without any of the rest. And now I can see what happens if you try it a few times. And this time, I'm getting the same answer every time for Yahoo, which is not showing what I wanted. So let's try Microsoft. At home, Yahoo had them rearranged in every query, which is the round robin I was looking for. You notice here, I'm just talking to one server, and it's always the same server. The cache was 589, 585, 580. The seconds are counting down. So I'm only reaching one server to tell me what Yahoo is around here. You know, I bet if I dug at a different server, let's try at 1111, which is Cloudflare. Yeah, let's see if this one works. Yep, that's working. 1111 does it, and Google would work too. So here you see, here I have 34 and on. Here I reached a different cache record on a different server that went here. So when I dig, this is a cluster, and the records are all different. So this one has 34 on top. This one has 34 down here. They're the same addresses, but they're out of order. This is a simple way to perform load balancing. Everyone that tries to go to Yahoo, they get a different order of the records. So some of the traffic goes to this server, and some of the traffic goes to that server.
So your machine will do the first record that you received, so that which one will you use?
It'll take the first one, yeah. And if it can't reach it, then I think it'll try the next one, yeah. And so if I tried Google, I think it'd be the same thing. There's Google's DNS server. And yep, wait a minute, no. Nope, 16, 17, yeah. So this was 98, 164, and 163, right. She just had 164 on top and 163 down there. This one had 163 there and 164 there. That's called round robin.
What's
Yeah.
the second column?
Technochrome?
Second column.
The second column is the number of seconds left for this record to remain in the cache.
Oh, TTL?
Yeah, it starts out as TTL and then it counts down. That's why if I get rid of this, you can see it. Now you see 470, and if I just do it again, 467, it's counting down, and when it hits 0, it will ask the authoritative server for a refresh record. That's why you make this long for normal domains that don't move much, and if it's always short, that's suspicious. That means you're probably a criminal, you're moving around a lot because you're using a stolen server, and you keep having to move to another server. Anyway, so that's round robin DNS, which is not evidence of an attack. That's normal behavior. That's one way to perform load balancing. Then there's fast fluxing domain. Your TTL is only a few seconds, so the IP changes rapidly, and the idea here is to avoid detection and to maintain control of a botnet. So you're using a lot of hacked servers, and you keep on, they keep getting discovered and cleaned, and you keep moving to another one. And so you program your bot to try multiple places. So here's Conficker, one of the famous Windows worms. And so here you have records that are only 60 seconds good. If you take 28 seconds later, you'll see the same data because it's just gone from 60 down to 32. But if you, when it cuts down to 0, it will refresh, and these numbers are all different. It was talking to the 65, now it's going to recover. So within that 1 minute, it moved somewhere else. So the server is moving around a lot, which is one technique to avoid getting taken down. And so you can detect this if you record the domain, the IP, and so on. So here, this should be fast flux domains, where this reforma.com went to 10, and then it went to 20, and then it went to 30, and then it went to 40. So this shows, this is very unusual. I mean, normally people stay at one IP address for years, and then they move to a different hosting provider, and they stay there for years. Changing every few seconds, every few minutes to another one is suspicious behavior. And then, yes, Yes, you have to copy all the files onto the other server, and then you have to update all your DNS records so traffic will go to the new server. So it's not a small thing.
How can you transfer all the files in like 1 minute?
Oh, well, they set them up in advance. You know, they'll have a script that infects a server, and they'll infect a whole bunch of servers with some kind of mass exploit, and then they'll just strobe between them. That way they keep the botnet connected, even though some of them keep going down as people find out they've been infected and clean it. That's the sort of thing. Good? All right, and then there's phantom domains. This was a big deal for a while. There was a time when you could register a domain and you could use it for like 3 days before you had to pay. And the criminals loved this, of course. They would just use it for 3 days, abandon it, and go on to the next one. That's a phantom domain. Very few people will let you do that anymore. So you have to take the next step up, which is pay with a stolen credit card, which is the next thing they do. But anyway, all right. And this protects you against sinkholing. See, if you have a domain that's malicious, and there's a ton of these, the Microsoft browser will automatically block them. It'll pop up, this is a phishing domain. OpenDNS will block it. So there's these lists of known malicious domains, and there are services that stop traffic going to them. So that's sinkholing. Sinkholing is one technique. Sinkholing is the technique of taking traffic going to a certain site and just throwing it away, so you don't get there anymore. You can do that at your gateway router or elsewhere on your network. And so if that happens to you and you're a criminal, then the cure is to keep moving to another domain. Now, if you're going to do that, your malware has to know to keep trying different domains. So you find domains. This is one common trick. Find a domain and see when it was registered. This is public information in the whois record. When was that domain record? So let me try this, for example. You can do whois, samsclass.info. There, and you get information about it, and it shows you the dates. The dates went by there. All right, I don't feel like scrolling back. I'm going to pipe it through more. There. This tells you something about it, and I saw dates. There, created in 2001 and changed in 2023. So you can tell how long this domain has been there. And if the domain has only existed for a few days, that's very suspicious. Again, people typically buy a domain and they use it for years. So that's an issue. Domains that haven't been around long, don't have historical IP addresses. You can go to DNS history. There's a bunch of DNS history services that let you see what previous IP addresses various DNS resolutions went to, and they're extremely useful for instant response and crime investigations because people have a malicious server and they use it for multiple campaigns of crime. So it has one bad domain and then another bad domain, another bad domain, all at the same IP address. So you can connect these and track down criminals. It's quite useful.
Why would criminals use phantom domains? I didn't understand.
They'd use a domain that changes frequently because once a domain is known to be malicious, there are many defenses that will block it. Microsoft has one called Safe Browsing or something, and so if you use the same one for a while, people learn it's malicious and they block it. So you have to move to another. Yeah.
So do people use a different domain but then use the same IP address?
Yes, very commonly. Now, switching the domain and the IP address would probably be best, but typically criminals have a server that they can use, and they keep using the same server for a long time, either because the people running it are not very good at detecting they've been hacked, or because they're going to bulletproof hosting. Bulletproof hosting is often in another country like Russia, and they charge a lot of money, and they will let you run malicious campaigns from their server. But then you paid for that server and you use it for many campaigns. So WannaCry was the ransomware which was developed based on NSA technology, and this is a highly controversial policy, which, by the way, the news shows China is now doing it too, ever since about 2017. They banned their researchers going to external security conferences and participating in capture the flag contests, and they passed a law that you must report all vulnerabilities to the government, who will then decide whether to tell anybody, and frequently not tell anybody. So they have a secret cache of known vulnerabilities that are not getting patched, and the NSA does the same thing. They caught many times poisoning cryptography to trick us into using broken cryptography so they can spy on us. And they've also found vulnerabilities and not told the manufacturer so it can get fixed, but keep it as a secret weapon. And then they lost the secrets. A contractor put it on a machine with Kaspersky antivirus on it, which sent it back to Russia, which got to the Russian military. So the Russian military used NSA technology to make a worm that was taking over machines all over the world, and it caused hospitals to go down in England. But Microsoft released a patch, but hospitals didn't install it in time. And so it had this big ransomware thing that would kick up. And what happened was malware tech, who is Marcus Hutchins, stopped it by accident. He had a sample of the malware and he analyzed it. He found a domain name in there. He looked and the domain name had not been bought, so he bought it. And this malware was designed for some reason, so if that domain existed, it would stop. So that was the off switch, just by luck. That is not a standard thing, but that's what happened in this case. Now,
The government say he's the bad guy, right?
yes, after he came to America and talked at DEF CON and Black Hat about this, then the FBI arrested him because years before this, he wrote and sold banking malware. So he did commit crimes apparently before, although I think he didn't have to go to prison. I think the EFS successfully defended him, but that's what they accused him of. They said he had previously committed other crimes. This was not a criminal act, this was a good thing, but the two don't necessarily cancel out. And then Conficker was a worm that infected Windows machines, and it just had an endless chain of these domain names. So it would try them all. So all the criminals have to do is buy one of these domain names, and then all the worms will strobe through until they find it. He would try 50,000 new domains a day. So when they found out about this, registrars tried to buy them and block them all to get ahead of the worm, which is not easy. That's the point of this. This is a pseudo-random sequence that they can predict. The criminal will just buy one of these per day, and all the rest are just wasting the analyst's time.
So the worm has to keep the list, right?
Yep, the worm creates the list with like a pseudo-random number generator. What's that?
But then the worm has to be get it very quick, right?
Well, it just has to have like a random number generator from a seed that creates a pseudo-random series, and then it has to make a lot of DNS queries trying to see if any of these are there.
So the worm has a random generator to generate all those.
Yeah, the worm has a generator to generate these domain names, and they're not random. They're created according to a pattern you can see by reading the code.
How you use the same seed or something different?
Yeah, you just use a seed into a random number generator, yeah.
How would this work? Like, what does a worm do?
Well, the worms put your machine under remote control, this one does, and then it gets commands from the command and control server. And one thing's crazy about Conficker, it came out about 10 years ago, it infected huge amounts of Windows machines and then went through like 7 updates to make it more and more powerful, and everybody panicked and freaked out. But for like years, all these machines were infected and they never did anything with it. They could have used them in a DDoS campaign or stolen information from those machines, but they never did. No one ever understood why. It's a problem. The underground, the criminal world is often as disorganized as the above ground world. There are different people with different skills. There are people who write malware to infect machines, and then there are people who rent those machines out to other criminals to use for something, like sending spam. And apparently, they had these machines, but they were not able to negotiate a deal to rent them out to anybody until all the antivirus companies and Microsoft and everybody put out patches and cleaned it off. So people were very worried about it. They saw when the next version was coming out, there were several scary events. In a month, the next version is coming out. There are like 1 million infected machines. All of them are going to get updated. They're probably going to do something terrible, like a DDoS attack, but then they just didn't. But it was made a lot of news for many years. It was a big infection, but did no apparent harm.
Like these worms,
Yeah.
you can control the remote machine. Why would they need to try the random domains?
Well, because they have to reach the command and control server. And if they put the command and control server at a fixed IP address, everybody will find out and just block it. If you put it at a fixed domain name, everybody will find out and just block it. So this was their solution. It creates 50,000 new domains every day. So
all these are like malicious domains?
no, most of them are just meaningless and not real domains. But the botnet controllers will buy one of them and use it. And then tomorrow they'll buy another one of the 50,000, and every worm will find it and put it under control. And it's a simple way to maintain control of them while making it very difficult for defenders to stop it. Unless defenders can add all these to their block list all the time, they're not going to be able to stop it. That was the idea. Yeah. Anybody? You can go to any domain registrar like 1&1 or like GoDaddy and just buy a domain. They'll sell you any domain you want. It's not like this is obviously malicious or anything. You can buy a domain with a few random letters, .net. Anybody will sell it to you. And typically it's pretty cheap too. Even less, it's like just $1 or $2 a year for like a .net. .coms are like $10 a year. Yeah.
GoDaddy has this list, right?
Well, everybody has access to the same list. They will just query to see if the domain has already been bought, already in use. If it is, then you have to buy it from the owner. If not, you can just buy a new domain, and there's a whole bunch of domain registrars that do this.
GoDaddy is just a distributor, right?
GoDaddy is what?
It's just a distributor.
Oh, I think they are, sure. There's various companies that do it. Lots of them do. GoDaddy's one of them.
We can't just blacklist all of this abuse.
That's right. It'd be very hard to blacklist all these, and if you wanted to stop the malware, you'd have to purchase them all, and then find the one that's actually used, and then send commands to the bot to like uninstall it or something, which is what Microsoft has done a few times. They've actually taken over a botnet and then cleaned it off by issuing commands for it to destroy itself. That's worked a few times. That's quite difficult. And it's, by the way, not easy to get legal permission to do that. In fact, I don't understand how they can possibly get legal permission to do that, because they're affecting machines that are clearly outside the jurisdiction of whatever court you went to. But Microsoft has succeeded in doing that several times over the last few years. So they've found some way to make this legal. That's one thing people do. Anyway, then you got, here's another cute trick that's been going on for a while, DNS Changer. Infect your machine, and all they do is change your DNS settings. So now you use a different DNS server, which is under the attacker's control. And they configure a server which will mostly tell you the truth, but it will lie about whatever the target is. And I think the big target was a Brazilian bank. So now when you go to the bank, you'll go to the wrong bank site. It's very cute. It's quite effective, and this keeps coming around. This is a pretty effective attack. Of course, you do have to get permissions on the target machine enough to change the DNS settings once. So you basically need root permissions there, but you make a very minor change that they might not detect. And then they might be harmed a month from now when they go to the banking website, where you'll never correlate that with the traffic where you clicked on a link a month ago. So it's a pretty good subtle attack.
Could the user just like Google the latest, the company to?
Oh, you could. You could also just, yeah, you could also just use a legitimate resolver like I did. I used 8888, which is Google. That's a legitimate resolver. But if you just do a normal, go to a web page and type in the URL, it'll just use your default resolver, and you don't really know what that is unless you look.
But you can like do a Google search of that company, and then it will direct to the correct,
No. This is actually a really important issue. So if I wanted to go to like Bank of America, I could go to Google, and I could search for Bank of America, and I will get a URL, bankofamerica.com. Now, if I click this, it's going to do a DNS request to find bankofamerica.com. And if I'm using a malicious DNS server, I'll get the wrong address.
Who's doing that? I thought that was the Google that do that, the DNS lookup, not the.
No, I don't think so. This browser will look up through my default DNS. So if you click a link, it will go, you can see down at the bottom of the screen, go to bankofamerica.com, but it will resolve that by using your local DNS. It will not go to Google unless you configured Google to be your DNS provider. So this is a pretty good attack. It will not save you here. All right. Anyway, so all right, then you can, so you want to detect these things, look for recursive DNS requests that go to a strange server. I mean, at your company, you really ought to force people to use your known DNS server so you can log it. But if you're letting them use other things like OpenDNS and Google and Cloudflare, still those are known public resolvers, and you'll see recursive requests going to a strange address that is not a known public resolver. That would be strange. Not your ISP, not a known server, and perhaps in a blacklist associated with these other nasty domains located more than 1,000 miles away. These are all clues that they're using a strange DNS server which they really shouldn't be using.
So the attacker somehow got into your system and
Yes.
changed your browsers?
Yes, your system has to be infected with malware, which then changes your DNS. But instead of doing anything obvious like sending out spam or doing a DDoS attack, it just changes your DNS and nothing else. So you were infected, and they could have done anything to you, but they chose to do something very subtle that you wouldn't notice. Yeah, good? All right, and so for tunneling, your firewalls all have to allow port 53 through, so you can do these DNS requests. Therefore, you can tunnel traffic as fake DNS requests. DNS and HTTP are allowed on every network, so if you want to sneak data out of a network, you disguise it so it looks like DNS or HTTP traffic to leave. So what you do is you just send a lot of UDP request packets. So you can do, I got some projects actually where you simulate this, but you do like dig, you could do a dig of samsclass.info. If you're really going to a website, you'll do a DNS request like this. But if I'm trying to sneak data out, I will have a thing like this. Dot. I'll have this name of the server that is just long random junk and serve it. Now it won't find it, but I can tunnel data out in these long names. And you can do it with HTTP too. You can go to a website that has this long gibberish name, which is base64 encoded traffic you're trying to sneak out of the network. So you'll have a flood of these DNS requests coming out, concealing data there. And so you'll see here, if you look at how big DNS requests are, they're mostly pretty small, less than 100 bytes, but you'll have some of them 500 bytes, which is the maximum allowed size. So sending large DNS requests is suspicious. The only reason the request would be that long is because you have a ridiculously long name of the server, which is probably not a real server name. It's probably tunneled traffic.
The DNS request only goes to the DNS server, right? So
Yes. Well, you can send it to anywhere, right? I can put an @ here and send it anywhere I want. But that means the criminal will have, I can send it to any server I want. So if I have your machine infected with malware, I can send DNS requests anywhere I want. And so I'll send them to a malicious server, and the malicious server might run a DNS server and answer, or maybe it won't even answer because UDP goes through even if there is no answer. So all I have to do is sniff at the server and not answer. But your firewall and your IDS and everything will just see DNS requests going out, and it won't look unusual unless you look at it more carefully. The unusual thing is the size is too big, and another thing is the entropy is too big. Entropy is a measure of the disorder, and if you look at the entropy of traffic, tunneled traffic has high entropy because there's these long random names as opposed to just simple words, which is what you normally see in URLs. So if you look just at the protocol, just DNS, you won't see anything wrong, but if you analyze the packets in more detail, you can tell from size and from the entropy in them that they are strange requests, not like normal requests. Then there's DOS attacks. The attack against your DNS server just floods it with traffic, TCP, UDP, SYN, and now I have true source addresses. Oh, I see some comments in the Twitch. Let me see what's going on here. Name.com. Name.com is a common registrar, yeah. And log4j, yeah, that's right. All right. And 9 domain name system. Yep, that's right. I'm glad you guys remembered name.com, a good DNS one. Yeah. What's the benefits of sending large? Yeah, that's right. The point of these large requests, like this one here, is that you are trying to sneak stolen data off the network. So I have stolen some data, like passwords and credit card numbers on your network. Now, if I try to send them off unencrypted, I'll get caught, typically on the way out, because you have data loss prevention services that look for that. So I want to sneak that data off. So what I do is I base64 encode it, and then I sneak it out with that kind of stuff. Actually, base64, so I can use all these. You put junk like that, and then .evil.com. And so it will now send this to the DNS server for evil.com. It will ultimately go there. This will go on a normal DNS server, and it will ask evil.com, do you have a server at that name? So I'm controlling that domain. I'm controlling that DNS server. This data will eventually reach me, and that data can be stolen encrypted data from the network. It can be requests it can be the command and control center. I can receive this and then give it an answer with another gibberish in it, and that could be the botnet phoning home, asking for commands, and me sending commands. So I can use it for two-way communication, or I can use it for exfiltration of data. It's a covert channel. I'm now able to send data out of your network and send data into your network without you detecting it or realizing it's happening, which is a necessary part of command and control.
So the data will actually go to the evil.com to ask?
Yes. If you try to go to anything at evil.com, it won't be in the cache of your local resolver, so it will go and ask the evil.com authoritative server, what's the IP for that? And so the data will enter that server. And I can then just collect the data, or I could even answer, and the answer could contain more information, like a reference to another URL, like a delegation. So I could trade data back and forth, hidden in the packets.
So you won't need some IP address at the end?
Yeah, you could do that too, or you can do it this way. There are many ways to do it. Yep, that's right. And you can also do it with HTTP or HTTPS or really any kind of traffic, but you just use some common traffic so it will mix in with all the other traffic and be hard for the good guys to detect. These are good questions. All right.
So do you reckon, like, let's say post or post request will be easy to detect, but using like DNS request is hard to detect, right?
Yeah, well, it's you have to know what to look for. In this one clue is the request will be much larger than usual. Another thing is it will have higher entropy. This is more disordered than normal names. Normal names are not that random. So so you have to look not just at the net flow data, but you'd have to actually look more deeply in the packets and do some kind of statistical test. All right. And so if you want to detect a denial of service attack, then you just look for unusual total amounts of traffic, more bits per second, more DNS requests, more SYN per second. This is the problem. You just look for a large amount of requests. They're really quite hard to stop. I remember when the Al-Qassam cyber army in Iran decided to take down American banks because there was a movie insulting Mohammed on YouTube, and they decided to punish us. And so they had a whole series of like 10 floods of attack on American banks to bring them down for a certain amount of time to punish them for that movie being up. And they were incredibly primitive. The first bunch, they would just send HTTP requests, and it was always for this domain. .bank.com. They would just send HTTP requests to this long name, just so it would use up some bandwidth. And so that was the first one. So it was real easy to stop. You would just look for incoming requests that had a lot of A's in it and block them.
Which bank would this block?
You want to attack any bank, you go to bankofamerica.com and you just send HTTP looking for this web page, which doesn't exist. But it's a request coming in, and then your web server has to process it to decide that page doesn't exist. And if I just send thousands of them, it wastes time on your web server and can bring it down. Any kind of traffic can bring it down. So what this is, because they're really pretty primitive, at first they just always used capital A's. And then people blocked that, and so they improved it and went to another layer, like 10 rounds of this. When I went to a B-Sides conference, there was a special talk in a private room that you couldn't record of a guy talking about how they were detecting and blocking these attacks. The various bank security engineers had a private mailing list they would talk to, and they would figure out how to stop these attacks. Every few weeks, they would upgrade the attack, and so the banks would upgrade their filters. So
This was those attacks on like DNS servers?
any kind of server. This would go directly to web server for this one, but any kind of server, you get all the DOS attacks, flood your server with useless traffic, and the way to stop it is to somehow find some way to tell the bad traffic from the good traffic. And if they're coming from fixed IP addresses, it's easy. You just block those IP addresses, but they typically go through proxies and Tor and stuff, so that doesn't work. So then you look for something else about that traffic that makes it different than real traffic. And there was one case where they had, it was pretty easy, but they gradually made it harder. And so the bank engineers had to keep developing and trading new scripts and stuff to stop it. But that's what you have to do to stop DOS attacks, is tell the good traffic from bad traffic. And this is what Cloudflare does. If you go behind Cloudflare, they will block the DOS attacks for free, and that's what they do. And in fact, one of my students was working there and shared my room at DEF CON. He was waking up in the middle of the night because they have an alert. They have an automatic system to block attacks, but if it can't understand it, then it wakes up an engineer who must be on call. And he was on call during DEF CON. So like 2 a.m, they called in, and he had to decide what to do about this suspicious activity. So,
Cloudflare sometimes asks you to do captchas, like folders.
yeah, Cloudflare does add captchas to pages too. That's one of the defenses. They have a bunch of defenses they'll put on for pages. And if you turn on I'm under attack mode, or if it detects a certain amount of suspicious traffic, then it will start putting up captchas. It has a variety of defenses. Another defense Cloudflare has, which is a pretty well-known one, is it has a JavaScript that must run to get to the domain. And this will stop you if you're not really a web browser. If you're just a Python script or something, you won't run the JavaScript. So this will just cause a few seconds of delay for a normal user, but it will block the attacks. There's a lot of tricks people use to try to make sure that you're really a human, really using a browser to come in, and not some kind of script sending out junk. And Cloudflare is a nice service for that. Another one is Akamai. Anyway, yeah.
Why does Tor traffic get blocked?
Almost everybody blocks Tor traffic for a very simple reason. If you look at the traffic coming from Tor, 99% of it is malicious. If you look at the traffic on Usenet, NNTP, 99% of it is malicious. The problem is criminals use it. Now, in principle, there are some other people that use it because they're privacy fanatics or they're dissidents in an authoritarian country protesting their government, but 99% of it is malware, kiddie porn, and horrible things like that because the criminals have to use it. This is the problem. Whenever you make a privacy service, or for that matter, Bitcoin, you make a cryptocurrency, why would anybody use it? Well, some people might use it because they're privacy fanatics, but the main people that have to use it are criminals. They can't use the normal system, so they use these systems. So in practice, 99% of the requests from Tor are malicious, so most companies just block it. And that's why the privacy fanatics feel abused. I try to use Tor and everybody blocks me, but most businesses that are just trying to stay up and make money don't care. You lose a small number of customers using Tor, everybody else, you're mostly blocking bad guys.
How do
Yeah.
you detect that you're using Tor?
Oh, because Tor has fixed exit nodes and there aren't that many.
Oh, it's like you're using VPN?
Just a list of IP addresses, yeah. And so there's and you can get the list, and people do just block the list. So all the traffic coming from Tor comes out of a small list of nodes, and many websites block it, which really offends the privacy advocates. But in practice, for example, you often block whole countries. Like if you don't have any customers in China, just block the whole nation, because anything coming from there is probably malicious, that kind of thing.
If they don't suspect DOS.
For example?
What's that?
They don't suspect DOS.
Well, it could be anything, DOS or any other kind of attack. The point is, if you can somehow tell traffic that is not legitimate traffic from customers, you might as well block it. It's up to no good. But usually, these days, you don't block whole nations, but almost everybody blocks
Best Buy
Tor.
has that. Best Buy blocks everything outside the US.
What? Oh, you could block everything outside US? Who does?
BestBuy.com.
Best Buy, I didn't know that.
I couldn't.
You can't buy, do they sell? Okay, maybe they don't do any business out of the US, that's an option, you could do that. But you know, most people do businesses all over the world, so blocking a whole country is not so common, but some people do it. Anyway, let's see here, how do VPN providers fail in this area? Well, VPN service providers provide some servers for you to go through, typically all over the place, and if they aren't careful, they're used by bad guys. There was a news article that came out about a series of attacks using VPN providers. Because once again, why would you use a VPN? You might be a privacy fanatic, but most people use a VPN. A large category of them are criminals. That's why they're hiding their IP address. And so there's a lot of crime going through VPN sites. So it's up to, if you're going to be a VPN service and you don't want everybody to block you, then you have to somehow try to filter it and not let the criminals use it too much. And there are VPN service providers that get a bad reputation. Criminals are using it for attacks, and people learn and they block them. So it's an issue. It's very good questions. All right, let's try some Cahoots, which are here. This is this one, 4B. Crank the music up there. This is the problem of everything on the internet. This is what I've heard people analyzing, like what happened to Twitter, is they don't realize that the actual service provided by most web companies is content filtering. If you don't block the bad stuff, then your service is overrun by criminals and used for nasty things. And so that's why, the value of a social network is the content moderation. So you can actually use it and talk to your friends, and it's not full of advertising and malware and spam and horrible stuff. And Elon Musk took away all the content moderation, and now nobody wants to use it. Advertisers can't use Twitter because if you put up an ad, you'll be next to like a Nazi thing, and that's bad for your brand. So the advertisers will only advertise on Facebook because Facebook cleans up the junk. You know they're not going to put you next to something horrible. And so this is something that the privacy people always have a struggle with. They don't want you blocking stuff, but in fact, if you run any kind of web service, you have to block the bad stuff, and that is actually how you provide value to your customers. If you don't block the bad stuff, you will just get taken over by criminals and become useless. And that's largely what happened to Tor and Usenet.
I don't think you have to block. You can just have like group sorting algorithm, like recommendation, and just like don't just show on the whole page.
That's one way you do it. That's what Twitter did before Elon Musk. They would not boost the harmful stuff. You might block it or you might just not boost it. That's right. Those are because you have to somehow suppress the bad stuff, and that's what he did not want to do because he loved the bad stuff. He wanted the bad stuff, and that's what he is now. Now it's just the bad stuff, and all the people who don't want to see that have left. So it's exactly what he said he would not do. He said, "I'm not going to make it into a toxic cesspool of alt-right content," and then that's exactly what he did. And if you do that, you have a small user base and a very small base of companies willing to advertise, and you can't make any money, and he's losing money like crazy.
That's why they made that we pay verified for users pay now.
Yeah, he's trying to keep making users pay, and he's not paying the bills. He's not paying the rent. He's not paying the server hosting fees. He's just not paying any of his bills. He's getting sued like crazy. He's not paying the severance pay for employees he fired. He's just not paying his bills, which is what Trump does. Once you're rich enough, you can just not pay your bills for a while. But now he's getting sued. So, what's that?
Until you get that pushed hard enough.
That's right, until you get pushed hard enough, and therefore the small suppliers who can't afford to make the lawsuit, they just don't get paid. It's really just theft. Anyway, so, all right, so what kind of packets perform DNS poisoning? DNS cache poisoning is what I'm referring to here. I think it applies to all forms of poisoning, but yes, the replies that poison you. You send requests for information, and the fake replies contain false information. That's cache poisoning. All right, so digaevil.com returns 4 IPs in a different order each time. So what's that? That's normal behavior. That is not any kind of attack. As I showed you, that's common. Microsoft does it, Yahoo does it. This is a common way to perform load balancing. Does not indicate any kind of evil activity. All right, if you always see TTL values below 61, what does that indicate? That's fast flux. They keep moving the actual IP of the server every minute, and that is, of course, not normal at all. That's suspicious, makes it seem like probably a malicious site. All right, what process creates a covert channel? Covert means you cannot see it. It's what spies use, right? Spies want to send a message out without anybody knowing they're sending that message. And that's tunneling. Tunneling hides traffic in other traffic so you do not know it's there. And so what did Marcus Hutchins do to stop WannaCry? This is not a perfect question. Part of why these things are extra credit, they're not perfect. Yeah, I think sinkholing might not be the perfect name for this, but the point is he did create a domain which would suck up some traffic that would have otherwise been rejected, and the botnet expected it to be rejected, and when that traffic was not rejected, then they've shut off. Anyway, I'm not sure sinkholing is a perfect term for this, but anyway, all right. Joseph, Luca, okay. Joseph and Luca and Colleen. Just a sec. Joseph and Luca. Okay, got that. Let me turn this off so I. And what was your question?
I said, why would malware check if domain didn't exist?
That's a good question. Well, you have to have some way to turn it off. I mean, normally,
It was like a switch.
yeah, it's just the way they wrote it. Now, normally, you would have a command and control server, and it would communicate, and then it would get orders from there, but you could choose to have a certain domain that just turns it off. It's not a normal thing to do, though.
It's like a smart switch.
You know, this happened to BART. I talked to a security engineer that did a penetration test of BART, the light rail here, and he was doing it, and he found an IP address, and the thing it just responded with 0. So he typed in 0, and it said 0. He typed in 1, and it said 1. No prompt, no login, no anything. So he said, well, why not? Then a while later, they came knocking on the door. What are you doing in there? He said, well, I'm doing the pen test. Did you go to this IP address? And he said, yeah, but there was nothing there, so I left. It turned out that was the master control switch for BART. 0 means the train's run, 1 means the trains are turned off. At that time, there was no password, no prompt, no anything. That was one of the results of the pen test. They needed to fix that. But this malware apparently was written the same way. A programmer can just write it in that way. It's just not a very good plan. Anyway, let me stop this recording.